What's going on, guys? Evil Dragon here, back with another video. And today, we're going to talk about why I think that the Nintendo 64 is the greatest console of all time. Now, really quick, I know I'm just going to be very biased, probably because it is my favorite console. Well, I didn't grow up playing with it. I absolutely love it now. So, you guys, you should take that into account. But, why I think it's great. Before we actually get into that, though, I do want to give some background history on the thing. So why not start with that? The console released in 1996 in North America following the massive success from the NES, and on a little lesser note, the SNES. Why was it lesser? Well, at the time, the crash of '85 when video games kind of fell down, many people weren't playing, The NES was brought up with Mario and Duck Hunt and Rob the Robot and a bunch of other stuff, and it was, a massive success and people liked it. Now, when people saw the SNES being released, they didn't really see it as the new toy, it was more of an upgrade, but why upgrade something that worked perfectly fine? Plus, the new competition from Sega kind of, really fought with the SNES, so that's why, its consoles that were sold went downhill. And then, of course, Sony invented the PlayStation, and Sega released their next console, the Sega Saturn, in '94, so that would put, some competition onto Nintendo. Because their major console wasn't out yet, they wanted it to be a very good one, a powerful one. After all, it was 64 bits. Now, the Sega Saturn and PlayStation were both 32 bits, and that meant they were weaker. What are bits? I don't know. They're just something that people cared about, which is why it's in the name Nintendo 64. That's how it was more powerful. Now, of course, the console was going to be also rumored 3D graphics, fully 3D graphics, not 2D like it was on the NES, not pseudo 2D and 3D on the SNES, say games like Star Fox or Pilot Wings. No, this was going to be full-on 3D graphics. The Sega Saturn and PS1, of course, were going to be starting off 2D and they would, move on to 3D, but at the time they were also majorly 2D graphics, so this was going to be a massive jump for Nintendo. It was going to get what people really wanted, which was an increase in gaming quality. Now, of course, at the time, the N64 was taking a little bit to come out. I mean, it was 1994 when the other two consoles came out, so they had to get something out in the meantime to kind of, settle their fans and say, hey, play this instead while we wait. And so they released the Virtual Boy, and it was terrible. It only lasted for about 8 months. So with that, 1996 came around, and boom, the N64 was released. And, people really thought it was good. It was the hot thing, the very big item for a little bit, until it wasn't. And the reason why is while the console, again, might be the greatest of all time, it had some flaws, some major flaws. So, these things are honestly pretty iconic. When you think of a cartridge, you don't think of this bulky NES type cartridge. Maybe you think of, the SNES cart with its rectangular shape. But what instantly comes to my mind is this, the Nintendo 64 cart. Its sleek design and nice curve is so iconic. But the problem with this thing, it stretches a mile, the biggest being its very limited storage space. It ranges from 4 megabytes all the way to 64 megabytes, and it was truly awful, especially compared to the competition of games for the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation 1, which ran on 650 megabyte discs, which is, pretty much 10 times as much storage space, even a little bit more. It also doesn't help that because of such limited storage, corners were clearly cut in graphics and audio sections of a lot of games that spanned all 3 consoles. Certain games, even masterpieces, don't look all too good, like say Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. Do they hold up good? Yeah. Do at some parts look absolutely amazing? Yes. And it doesn't make these games bad. But compare it to, say, the lighting, for example, Final Fantasy VII for the PS1, and it shows. They're muddy, they're kind of gross looking, it's just all too good. Again, I mentioned audio is an issue. If you compare the audio from the N64 Resident Evil 2 to the PS1 version of Resident Evil 2, you can definitely see where the audio is being copy and pasted in certain locations, and it's definitely being slower and cut out. It's very noticeable.
Sherry, I've been looking everywhere for you. I was so worried. We've got to go now, honey, okay? If we stay here, that monster will find us. Let's go.
No, I won't.
Sherry, I've been looking everywhere for you. I was so worried. We've got to go now, honey, okay? If we stay here, that monster will find us. Let's go.
No, I won't.
Yeah, I mean, right there are the differences. I'm pretty sure all of you, you can pick it out for yourselves. You can see even the graphically or the audio, it's definitely very different. It's more clear in the PS1 version, both the picture and the audio. I guess the other final thing is the games. I mean, that's another big flaw. The PS1 had over 1,000 games. The N64 in North America had just shy of 300, and overall, worldwide, just under 400. Third-party support, they couldn't get it because of how small the storage space was. I mean, they had nothing. We're not going to bother to talk about the controls for these games either, but honestly, it's the controller's fault. Let's take a look at this controller. I mean, it made sense in '96, but now we all know better. Hold it for 2D or 3D ways, but it's still just strange to look at and hold. I mean, it's a spider. So this confusing mess of controller, while we just talked about the flaws, man, some of the flaws can also be the right things. This controller visually is gross, and it in itself is a flaw, but back then and even now, it's also just a thing that is so correct, so right. You have a console that plays both 2D and 3D games, and so you need a controller that perfectly fits that, and I think they honestly nailed that. You hold the controller with the middle prawn and the right prawn, your left hand over the stick and start button, and your right hand over the A, B buttons and the C buttons, as well as using the R shoulder button at the top, and then the Z button on the back. For 2D games, you hold the left prawn and middle prawn, having again all the buttons, B, A, the C buttons, the shoulder button, not access to Z, but you have access to the stick with your left hand and the start button with your thumb. And for weird freaky games, you use the middle prawn and the left prawn, so you have the stick and the D-pad. I don't know what kind of games use that, but I mean, hey, if some game did use that, it perfectly works just fine. It's not the most perfect design, but it fits both the styles of gameplay, which makes sense. Speaking of which, this controller introduced Rumble through the Rumble Pack. I don't have one to show, and I don't actually have footage to show, but think of it as this little memory pack here, a little bit bigger, of course. You put some batteries in, you plug it into the back of your controller, and your controller starts to shake to a bunch of different games. I mean, this controller, while a mess, is the ideal controller for what the console was. Speaking of said console, I mean, this thing introduced something that had never been introduced before, and I don't believe would be seen until the next generation of consoles. The original Xbox, the PS2, the GameCube, and Sega Dreamcast. And that was 4-player multiplayer, the only console of its generation to have that. You can see there 1, 2, 3, 4 controller ports, and you can plug in all sorts of kinds of third-party controllers now, but of course the classic Spider N64 controller at the time. Man, that was a massive thing that it had over everything else. You can play so many different kinds of games with now 4 friends instead of just you and a buddy. You get everybody together for game night, or you all go to someone's house after a day of school and fun and learning, and you just go home and maybe play some Mario Kart or Smash Brothers or something. Man, it definitely changed it. And of course, as you see at the little top, there's a little opening. You have the jumper pack, which came standard with the console, but if you went ahead and bought one, you could buy the expansion pack that not just increased the console's power, but the RAM. It was really rarely utilized, but for the games that did utilize it, like say Resident Evil 2 or Pokemon Stadium 2, to give it that edge, it definitely helped and definitely showed. But with how good this console is and why I think it's best, I think we will go on to why I think it is the best console in the entire world and of all time, and that is because of the games. So this is my Nintendo 64 collection. 43 games in all, 40 cartridges, 3 games in the box with the manual. Actually, I might play PlayStation a lot, but if we don't count digital, it is the most hard copies I own as a collector of like a game. 43, which in reality isn't a lot, but then I have a bunch of consoles, so that's why it makes up a shelf. See the game shelf video. But yeah, these are going to be majorly the games I'm going to be talking about because those are the ones I've played. But, maybe we'll talk about some other ones. But again, the games are what make the console so good. Mainly multiplayer games, but there are some hidden gems of single-player games that are just so good. Now, again, I'm sorry if I don't have any footage for a specific game. I'll just show a picture. Or if I didn't talk about a game, like I don't have Yoshi's Story, I haven't played it, so that probably wouldn't be one, for example. Even though I think I've mentioned it now twice. But yeah. So, the N64 games, multiplayer-wise, were absolutely huge. You had your racing games like Mario Kart 64, you had F-Zero X, you had Mickey's Speedway USA, you had Diddy Kong Racing, and you had all of these other ones that reach so far that are either 2-player or 4-player, and you can have an absolute blast when you sit down with friends to play them. You have, of course, your fighting games like Super Smash Brothers, or I don't have them, but Mortal Kombat for the N64. There was Mortal Kombat 4 and the Mortal Kombat Trilogy. You have those ones. There are other fighting games that are out there like Killer Instinct. Those are absolutely great. You have your RTSs like StarCraft, where you build up your faction if you're a Terran or Protoss or Zerg, and you go head-to-head in the campaign, or you go head-to-head against a buddy, or work together to fight down an AI. You have other RTSs like Worms, where it's not as long as StarCraft, of course, but you still gotta plan out your strategy and fight your friends, or do the campaign again and come to a win. You have your party games, like the three that obviously come to mind are Mario Party 1, Mario Party 2, and Mario Party 3. These were absolutely massive. You hop in, you play a round of mini games, and then you fight, and whoever has the most coins, and then you buy those for stars, and whoever has the most stars wins. It was great. You have your puzzle games like Dr. Mario 64, or several Tetris games, Pokemon Puzzle League. These are not really my thing, but I mean, if you're into that, go ahead. There's something for everybody. You have the Pokemon games like Pokemon Snap, an on-rails photography game where you go ahead and take pictures of Pokemon and upload them to Professor Oak for a score. Or you have Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2, with Pokemon Stadium 1 having the ability to use all the first generation Pokemon, Pokemon Stadium 2, the first 2 generations of Pokemon, and you battle head-to-head in battles, or of course the mini games, which are a lot of fun. And one of the coolest things about that is the transfer pack. This cool little accessory. It works with a bunch of games. Like, it was planned for Perfect Dark. It works with Mickey Speedway USA, the Mario sports games, both golf and tennis. But the best use of these is with, let's be honest, Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, Green, Gold, Silver, and Crystal, where you can transfer your Pokemon over and use those in the Pokemon Stadium mode. For the level 5 all the way up to level 100, you can use your own team that you worked so hard for. Speaking of which, they're the start of the Mario sports games. Like, you have tennis and golf, which are... I'm not a big golf fan myself of Mario Golf. I never liked them, but Mario Tennis, man, what an absolute blast of a game. They are so much fun. And if you're not into Mario sports games, there are so many other sports games you can play with friends. You have your Maddens, your NHLs, your FIFAs, again, racing games, that's your thing. There's bowling. There's so many different types of things. Like I said earlier on, there might be under 300 games in North America, released in North America, but there is at least something for every genre that every person will like, or at least elements from one genre in a game that is titled another genre, for like horror or something. You have your first-person shooters, and how could I forget this one? This amazing classic of a game, GoldenEye 007. I mean, it was one of the best first-person shooters at the time. Of course, now it's aged probably pretty poorly, maybe graphically, but also the controls are really hard to use, I'll say. But the 4-player multiplayer, when you get friends together, I've done this before, getting 3 of my buddies and myself playing, and you go head-to-head against each other. Oh, it's so much fun. And now you can play that on the N64 expansion pass with the Switch Online. I'm not going to spend $60 for that. What a waste. And I mean, with shooters, there's always going to be single-player shooters. And starting off, I mean, Doom 64 is also a classic. The third sequel to Doom. Man, I like the Doom games, at least the old ones. They're so much fun to play and see and whatever. And while this game might have had 2D sprites, let's be honest here, it still played really good. Heck, Mario Kart 64 had 2D sprites, and unless you know that, you're not really going to notice that. Now, this one, while I couldn't get any footage for it, is still a really good game. Perfect Dark, sort of a sequel made by the same developers, which was rare. A really good second-party company to Nintendo. They made some of the good games like GoldenEye, and this sequel, Perfect Dark, was a really good follow-up using the same sort of engine and mechanics. A lot of the good graphics were definitely upgraded, but you can definitely tell it has GoldenEye-esque stuff in it. It was a really good game. Single-player games aren't just about, running guns. There's also some RPGs. like Quest 64. I mean, there was only really 3 RPGs for the system: Ogre Battle 64, Quest 64, and Quest 64 was only here. I mean, I guess to be a nice fantasy RPG, maybe something to contend with Final Fantasy. I really don't think so, but it was something, I guess. And then, of course, you have the greatest RPG I've absolutely ever played, besides maybe, you know, Pokemon Gold, and that is Paper Mario for the N64, the original Paper Mario. You know, sequel to the SNES Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars Paper Mario. It is a phenomenal RPG. Really long game, really good game. You'll get a lot of entertainment out of it, replayability. It is such a good RPG game. You of course have now one of probably the most influential and one of the greatest games of all time for single player games. And that are the platformers, and starting off Super Mario 64 as a good example. This game is so much so right. I mean, right off the title screen you can play with the face, and that's not even in the game. And then when you get actually into the game, man, it's something else. Just going back in there, trying to speed run, all the glitches, just the fun of playing it normally, you know, collecting all 120 stars. It's so much fun. You have, of course, other platformers like Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, Gex, Kirby 64. Man, there are so many good games on this console. I mean, not to mention, this game gets memed on a lot, and rightly so, because it is one of the worst games of all time. Maybe it is the worst game of all time, and that's Superman 64. The Nintendo 64 might have had so many good games. This is not one of them, but this is definitely something that might be known for having this terrible, terrible game. And while it has everything good and a lot of good stuff, this is also something that you could consider as it's really funny in this game, man. Check it out for yourself. It is really stupid. Now, looking back at this console, were there mistakes and flaws? Yes, that's why I wanted to name it right off the bat. I mean, I get it. But there's so much good stuff about it, so much stuff that is iconic and nostalgic. The controllers, the cartridges, the games, the graphics and audio might be messed up. You know, the joke about the N64 bits in the commercials themselves, man. This was one heck of a console and one great console, which is why when I got mine, I had played it before, but I got mine in 2019, right at the end, right before COVID, honestly, and of course COVID happened. That sucked, but at least I had my newest console, my first ever newest console, you could say, at the time when I started collecting my N64, and it was a lot of fun. I hope you guys did enjoy this random video, this retro video. I really wanted to work on this and explain why I thought this was the greatest console of all time. I absolutely love this console, and I'm glad I got to share it with all of you. I might do something like this again, but it definitely won't be what I think the greatest console of all time is. It might be something else, like maybe the most underrated or the most hated, something like that. But I hope you guys did enjoy nonetheless. Maybe leave a like, maybe leave a nice comment down below, maybe hit that subscribe button, retain that little bell, and I'll see you guys next time for another retro video. Bye, guys.